The Oklahoma sun blazed mercilessly across the Bennett farm, turning the red dirt to powder and baking everything beneath its relentless glare. It was the third week of July, and the temperature had been pushing past 95 degrees every single day, the kind of heat that made even the cattle move slowly, seeking shade wherever they could find it. Cole Bennett stood at the fence line, his weathered hands gripping the split rail as he stared across the south pasture. Sweat soaked through his denim shirt despite the early hour, barely 7 in the morning. Behind him, the old farmhouse sat quiet, except for the hum of the window air conditioning unit struggling against the heat. His eyes were fixed on one animal, Duke. The massive Hereford bull stood alone near the metal water trough, his rust-colored hide dull in the morning light. At 14 years old, Duke was ancient by bull standards. Most breeding bulls were retired or sold by 10, but Cole couldn't bring himself to part with the animal that had been the foundation of his herd for over a decade. But something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Duke hadn't drunk water in 2 days, maybe longer. Cole had noticed it first on Monday morning. The bull had approached the trough, lowered his massive head toward the water, then suddenly jerked back as if stung. He'd stood there for nearly an hour, motionless, just staring at the water before finally walking away. Tuesday had been the same, and now it was Wednesday. The screen door creaked behind him, and Maggie stepped onto the porch carrying 2 mugs of coffee. At 45, his wife still moved with the efficient grace of someone who'd spent her entire life on a working farm. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and concern creased her freckled face. "Still won't drink?" she asked, handing him a mug. Cole shook his head slowly. 3 days now, Mags. I've checked that trough a dozen times. Water's clean, no algae, no dead animals, nothing floating in it. Temperature's fine, but he won't go near it. Maybe he's drinking from the creek. I thought that too. Walked the entire fence line yesterday. The creek's bone dry from the heat. There's no other water source. Cole's voice tightened with worry. A bull his size in this heat not drinking for 3 days? He should be dead already. Maggie moved beside him, resting her hand on his shoulder. What about the other cattle? That's what makes it so damn strange. The others are drinking fine. I've watched them. They walk right up to that trough, drink their fill, and move on. But Duke? He gestured toward the bull with his mug. He approaches it every few hours like clockwork, lowers his head, then backs away. Every single time. They stood in silence, watching Duke. The old bull's ribs were starting to show through his hide, and his movements had become slower, more deliberate. His eyes, usually bright and alert, had taken on a glassy, distant quality. You need to call Dr. Chen, Maggie said firmly. This isn't normal behavior, Cole. Something's wrong with him. Cole had been avoiding that thought, avoiding the reality that Duke might be dying. The bull had been with them since the beginning, since Cole's father had passed and left him the farm 15 years ago. Duke had sired over 200 calves, had been gentle enough for Cole's nieces and nephews to pet, had stood like a statue through countless county fairs. I know, Cole finally admitted, his voice rough. I'll call her this morning. He took a long drink of coffee, the bitter heat matching the worry in his gut. In the pasture, Duke moved closer to the trough again, his hooves leaving prints in the powdery dirt. The bull's massive head lowered toward the water, his nose inches from the surface. Cole found himself holding his breath, hoping, praying that this time would be different. But Duke suddenly jerked his head up, his entire body going rigid. He let out a low, distressed bellow that echoed across the quiet morning, a sound Cole had never heard from him before. It wasn't pain, exactly. It was something else. Something that made the hair on Cole's arms stand up despite the heat. The bull backed away from the trough, his eyes fixed on the water, as if something in there had threatened him. He stood 10 feet away, perfectly still except for his labored breathing, just watching. Guarding. Jesus, Maggie whispered. Cole, that's not normal. That's not sick animal behavior. That's fear, Cole finished, his throat tight. He's afraid of something in that water, but that made no sense. Cole had checked the trough repeatedly. There was nothing there, just clean well water in a metal tank. Yet Duke stood there, refusing to leave, refusing to drink, as if whatever was in that trough was more important than his own survival. Cole set down his coffee mug with shaking hands. "I'm calling Dr. Chen right now. Something's not right here, Mags. Something we're missing." As he turned toward the house, he glanced back one more time. Duke hadn't moved. The old bull stood like a sentinel beside that water trough, his massive body between it and the rest of the herd, as if protecting something. Or someone. Cole's chest tightened with a fear he couldn't name. Whatever was happening here, whatever was in that water that Duke could sense and he couldn't, he had a terrible feeling that when they finally discovered the truth, nothing on the farm would ever be the same again. Dr. Sarah Chen's white pickup truck appeared on the horizon 90 minutes later, trailing dust down the long gravel driveway. Cole watched from the porch, his phone still warm in his hand from the urgent call he'd made. Beside him, Maggie twisted a dish towel between her fingers, her worry lines deepening with each passing minute. "Thank God she could come so quickly," Maggie said softly. Cole nodded, but couldn't shake the knot of dread in his stomach. In the pasture, Duke hadn't moved from his position beside the water trough. 3 hours now, standing in the blazing sun, refusing to drink, refusing to leave. Dr. Chen stepped out of her truck, medical bag in hand. At 38, she was one of the best large animal veterinarians in the county, with a reputation for solving problems other vets gave up on. Her black hair was pulled back in a neat braid, and despite the heat, she looked composed and professional in her khaki work clothes. "Cole, Maggie," she greeted them with a quick nod. "You said on the phone Duke won't drink?" 3 days, Cole said, leading her toward the pasture. "Maybe longer. And it's not that he can't, Sarah. It's that he won't. He approaches the trough, gets close, then backs away like something's threatening him." Dr. Chen's expression grew serious. "In this heat, a bull his size should be drinking 15 to 20 gallons a day. 3 days without water." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. They reached the fence and Dr. Chen stopped, studying Duke from a distance. The bull stood motionless, his massive body positioned between the trough and the rest of the herd. His head was lowered, eyes fixed on the water. "Has he shown any other symptoms?" Dr. Chen asked, pulling out a notepad. "Lethargy, loss of appetite, difficulty walking?" "He's weaker, obviously," Cole replied. "Moving slower. But Sarah, it's not a sickness. I've watched him. He wants to drink. He needs to drink. But something's stopping him." Dr. Chen climbed over the fence with practiced ease, moving slowly so as not to startle the bull. Cole and Maggie followed, keeping their distance. The Oklahoma heat pressed down on them like a physical weight, the air shimmering above the red earth. Duke's ears twitched as they approached, but he didn't turn around. His focus remained locked on the water trough. "Easy, big guy," Dr. Chen said softly, her voice calm and soothing. "I'm just here to help." She moved closer, close enough to run her hand along Duke's flank. The bull's hide was hot to the touch, his breathing shallow and rapid. Dr. Chen pulled out her stethoscope and listened to his heart, then checked his gums, his eyes, his temperature. "Severe dehydration," she murmured. "Heart rate's elevated, body temperature's climbing. Cole, if he doesn't drink soon, we're going to lose him." "Then what's stopping him?" Maggie asked, her voice tight with emotion. Dr. Chen stepped around Duke's massive body, approaching the water trough. It was a standard galvanized steel tank, about 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, filled with clear well water. A few insects floated on the surface, nothing unusual. The water level was high, recently filled. She knelt beside it, examining the water closely. "I don't see any contamination, no chemical smell, no discoloration, no dead animals." Then she stopped. Her eyes narrowed. "Wait," she said quietly. Cole felt his heart skip. "What? What is it?" Dr. Chen leaned closer to the water's surface, her face inches from it. For a long moment she didn't move, didn't speak. Then she stood up abruptly, her expression transformed from confusion to shock. "Cole," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Get me a net, now." "What did you see?" "Just get me a net. And a towel. Quickly." Cole ran back to the barn, his boots pounding on the hard earth. His mind raced. What could possibly be in that water that would make Dr. Chen's face go pale? He grabbed a fishing net from his equipment shed and a stack of clean towels, then sprinted back. When he returned, Dr. Chen was on her knees beside the trough, her hands hovering over the water. Maggie stood behind her, one hand pressed to her mouth. "What is it?" Cole demanded. "What's in there?" Dr. Chen took the net from him, her hands steady despite the tension in her jaw. "Duke wasn't refusing to drink," she said quietly. "He was standing guard." She carefully dipped the net into the water, moving slowly, precisely. The surface rippled, disturbed for the first time in days. And then Cole saw it. Something white, small, moving weakly in the water. Dr. Chen lifted the net, and water cascaded through the mesh. Lying in the center, soaked and barely breathing, was a tiny white kitten. Maggie gasped. Oh my God. The kitten was maybe 3 months old, its white fur plastered to its tiny body, making it look even smaller. Its eyes were barely open, its breathing shallow and labored. It had been in that water for days, floating, somehow staying alive. And Duke... Cole looked at the old bull, who was now watching them intently, his body finally relaxing. He knew, Cole whispered, his voice breaking. He knew the kitten was drowning, and he wouldn't drink because he was afraid he'd make waves, afraid he'd push it under. He's been standing here, protecting it, for 3 days. Dr. Chen wrapped the kitten gently in a towel, cradling it against her chest. We need to get it warm and dry immediately. It's hypothermic and dehydrated. I don't know how it survived this long. Duke took a step toward them, then another. His massive head lowered, gently nudging Dr. Chen's arm where she held the kitten. The gesture was so tender, so protective, that tears sprang to Maggie's eyes. It's okay, boy, Dr. Chen said softly to the bull. I've got it now. You can drink. But Duke didn't move toward the water. Instead, he followed Dr. Chen as she carried the kitten toward the truck, his eyes never leaving the small white bundle in her arms. The old bull who'd been dying of thirst for 3 days wasn't interested in water anymore. He was making sure his rescue was successful. Dr. Chen moved quickly toward her truck, the tiny white kitten wrapped in towels and pressed against her chest. Behind her, Duke followed with slow, deliberate steps, his massive hooves crunching on the gravel. The bull's eyes never left the small bundle in her arms. Cole, I need your kitchen table cleared, Dr. Chen called over her shoulder, and boil water, get me heating pads, more towels, and a cardboard box. Move! Maggie was already running toward the house. Cole grabbed Duke's halter, trying to guide him back toward the pasture, but the old bull planted his hooves and refused to budge. Come on, boy, Cole urged gently. You need to drink. You're dying of thirst. Duke bellowed softly, a sound of protest, his eyes still locked on the kitten disappearing into the farmhouse. She's got it, Cole said, his voice thick with emotion. Dr. Chen will save it. But I need you to drink, Duke. Please. The bull stood motionless for another long moment, then finally, reluctantly, turned toward the trough. He approached it slowly, as if the habit of 3 days' refusal was hard to break. His nose touched the water surface, sending small ripples across it. Then he drank. Long, desperate gulps that spoke of unbearable thirst. Cole watched, tears streaming down his weathered face. Good boy, he whispered. You did good. You saved it. Inside the farmhouse, Dr. Chen had transformed the kitchen into an emergency veterinary clinic. The kitten lay on a pile of towels on the table, its white fur still matted and wet, its tiny chest rising and falling with shallow, irregular breaths. Maggie stood beside her, heating pads ready, a box of supplies pulled from Dr. Chen's truck spread across the counter. How bad is it? Maggie asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Chen worked quickly, her hands gentle but efficient. She used a soft cloth to carefully dry the kitten's fur, checked its temperature with a small thermometer, listened to its heart and lungs. Body temperature is dangerously low, 85 degrees when it should be over 100. Severe dehydration despite being in water. Salt water draws moisture from the body, and even fresh water can do the same with prolonged exposure. She gently opened the kitten's mouth, examining its gums. Pale pink, signs of shock. And listen to this breathing, fluid in the lungs, aspiration pneumonia from inhaling water. Will it survive? Maggie whispered. Dr. Chen didn't answer immediately. She wrapped the kitten carefully in a dry towel and placed it on a heating pad set to low. The next few hours are critical. If we can get its temperature up, get some fluids in it, and prevent the pneumonia from worsening. She paused. It has a chance. But Maggie, it's been in that water for at least 3 days in 100-degree heat. The odds aren't good. The kitten let out a weak, barely audible mew. Its blue eyes opened slightly, unfocused and clouded. Maggie's hand flew to her mouth. It's trying to cry. Dr. Chen prepared a syringe with warmed electrolyte solution. I'm going to give subcutaneous fluids. The kitten's too weak to drink on its own right now. She gently lifted the loose skin at the back of the kitten's neck and carefully inserted the needle. The kitten barely reacted, too exhausted even to flinch. Outside, they heard heavy footsteps on the porch. Both women turned as Cole opened the screen door, and Duke's massive head pushed through behind him. Cole! Maggie exclaimed. You can't bring a bull into the house. Try telling him that, Cole said, his voice a mixture of exasperation and wonder. He drank, then followed me straight here. Won't leave the porch. Just stands there, looking through the door. Dr. Chen glanced at the bull's face pressed against the screen, his large brown eyes focused intently on the small white form on the kitchen table. Let him watch, she said quietly. He's earned it. For the next 2 hours, Dr. Chen worked tirelessly. She administered fluids, antibiotics for the pneumonia, and carefully warmed the kitten using heating pads and warm towels. Cole and Maggie assisted, bringing supplies, heating water, replacing towels as they cooled. And through it all, Duke stood on the porch, his nose pressed to the screen door, watching. The kitten's temperature slowly began to rise. 86 degrees. 87. By noon, it had reached 90 degrees. Come on, little one, Dr. Chen murmured, gently rubbing the kitten's tiny paws to stimulate circulation. Fight. Duke fought for you. Now you fight too. At 12:30, the kitten's eyes opened fully for the first time. They were a striking blue, clear and alert. It lifted its head slightly, looking around the kitchen with confused curiosity. Then it mewed. Louder this time. A real cry. Outside, Duke bellowed in response. Maggie laughed through her tears. He heard it. Cole, he heard the kitten cry. Dr. Chen smiled, the first smile she'd allowed herself all morning. Temperature's up to 94. Heart rate stabilizing. Breathing still labored but stronger. She looked at Cole and Maggie. I think it's gonna make it. The kitten tried to stand on wobbly legs, then collapsed back onto the towel. But its eyes stayed open, watching them, and its tiny pink nose twitched as it took in the scents of the farmhouse. Dr. Chen carefully lifted the kitten and carried it to the screen door. Duke's enormous head was still there, pressed against the mesh. Look, she said softly, holding the kitten up so the bull could see. It's alive, because of you. Duke's eyes, usually so placid and calm, seemed to brighten. He snorted gently, his warm breath fogging the screen. The kitten mewed again, reaching one tiny white paw toward the bull. For a long moment, man, woman, vet, bull, and kitten stood in perfect silence, connected by something deeper than words. What happens now? Cole asked quietly. Dr. Chen turned back to the kitchen table, gently placing the kitten back on its nest of warm towels. Now, we keep it warm, keep giving fluids, monitor for complications. The pneumonia is the biggest concern. It'll need antibiotics for at least 10 days, possibly longer. It can stay here, Maggie said immediately. We'll take care of it. Dr. Chen nodded. I thought you might say that. She reached into her medical bag and pulled out bottles of medication, syringes, and a feeding tube. I'll come back this evening to check on it. And Duke needs monitoring too. 3 days without water did serious damage. Cole looked out at the bull, still standing guard at the door. Something tells me Duke's not going anywhere until he knows that kitten is safe. And he was right. For the rest of that day, Duke stood on the Bennett's front porch, refusing food, barely drinking, his eyes fixed on the screen door and the small white life he'd protected with everything he had. By evening, word had spread through the small Oklahoma community like wildfire. Cole's neighbor, Jim Patterson, had stopped by to borrow a tool and witnessed Duke standing guard on the porch, the white kitten visible through the screen door. Within an hour, Jim had told his wife, who told the ladies at the church, who posted about it on Facebook. By sunset, there were 12 cars parked along the Bennett's driveway. Cole stood on the porch, bewildered, as neighbors he'd known for decades emerged from vehicles carrying casserole dishes, bags of cat food, blankets, and toys. Duke had finally been coaxed back to the barn, though he'd gone reluctantly, constantly looking back toward the house. "We heard about what Duke did," Mary Henderson said, pressing a still warm dish into Maggie's hands. "That's the most incredible thing I've ever heard." "Is the kitten really going to make it?" asked Tom Weber, the mechanic from town. Inside, Dr. Chen was checking the kitten's vitals again. The small white ball of fur was curled up in a cardboard box lined with heating pads and soft towels. Its temperature had stabilized at 98 degrees, and its breathing, while still labored, had improved significantly. "Guarded prognosis," Dr. Chen told the growing crowd gathered in the kitchen. "But it's fighting, just like Duke knew it would." Someone had taken a photo. Cole didn't even see who. But within minutes, the image was online. Duke's massive face pressed against the screen door, the tiny white kitten visible on the kitchen table in the background. The caption read, "Bull refuses water for 3 days to protect drowning kitten. Oklahoma farmer discovers why his prize bull was dying." By 9 o'clock that night, the post had been shared 3,000 times. By midnight, national news outlets were calling. Cole woke Thursday morning to his phone ringing constantly. Messages flooded in from strangers across the country, across the world. Good Morning America wanted an interview. The local news station had already sent a crew that was setting up equipment in his driveway. "Cole, there are reporters everywhere," Maggie said, looking out the window with wide eyes. "What do we do?" Dr. Chen arrived at 7 a.m. as promised, navigating through the crowd of news vans and curious onlookers. She pushed through to the house, her medical bag in hand, her expression a mixture of amazement and concern. "How's our patient?" she asked, checking the kitten immediately. The small white kitten was sitting up in its box, eyes bright and alert. When it saw Dr. Chen, it mewed loudly, reaching out with tiny paws. "Temperature normal," Dr. Chen said, smiling. "Breathing much improved. Heart rate steady. This little one is a fighter." She looked up at Cole and Maggie. "I think it's going to survive." Maggie burst into tears of relief. Cole wrapped his arm around her shoulders, his own eyes suspiciously wet. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. A young reporter with perfectly styled hair and a microphone stood on the porch, a cameraman behind her. "Mr. Bennett, I'm Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. The world wants to hear Duke's story. Would you be willing to talk to us?" Cole hesitated, glancing at Dr. Chen, who nodded encouragingly. "The story deserves to be told," she said quietly. "What Duke did, that kind of compassion, that kind of sacrifice, people need to hear about it." So Cole found himself standing in his own pasture 30 minutes later, cameras pointed at him as he told the story. Behind him, Duke grazed peacefully, seemingly unaware that he'd become an international sensation. "He's 14 years old," Cole said, his voice thick with emotion. "Most bulls his age have been retired or sold, but Duke's special, always has been. Gentle, intelligent, patient." He paused, looking at the old bull. "But what he did these past 3 days, standing in 100-degree heat, dying of thirst, just to protect a kitten he'd never met, that's beyond anything I've ever seen." "Have you named the kitten yet?" Jennifer asked. Cole smiled. "My wife has. She's calling it Lucky, because it's the luckiest kitten in Oklahoma to have been found by Duke." The interview aired that afternoon. Within hours, the story had exploded across social media. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, everyone was talking about Duke and Lucky. The hashtag #DukeSavesLucky was trending worldwide. But not all the attention was welcome. That evening, a man in an expensive suit appeared at the farm. His name was Richard Carlson, and he represented a livestock company out of Texas. "Mr. Bennett," Carlson said, his smile too wide, too practiced, "I'm prepared to offer you $50,000 for Duke. We want him for breeding purposes, but also for publicity. A bull like that, with that story, he's worth a fortune." Cole's expression hardened. "Duke's not for sale." "75,000, Carlson countered immediately. "Final offer." "I don't care if you offer $1 million, Cole said, his voice cold. "That bull saved a life. He stood guard for 3 days in the heat, dying, just to protect something helpless. And you think I'd sell him? Get off my property." Carlson's smile vanished. "You're making a mistake, Bennett. That bull's old. How many years does he have left? 2? 3? This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The answer's no. Now leave." After Carlson drove away, Cole walked to the barn where Duke stood in his stall. The old bull raised his head, and Cole pressed his forehead against Duke's massive skull. "You're not going anywhere," he whispered. "You're staying right here until the end. I promise." Inside the house, Maggie sat beside Lucky's box, watching the kitten sleep. The small white bundle was curled up tight, its breathing steady and peaceful. On the kitchen table, her laptop showed the news coverage, thousands of comments from people around the world, all moved by Duke's story. "Look at this," she called to Cole when he came inside. "Someone started a GoFundMe to help with veterinary costs. It's already raised $12,000. Cole stared at the screen in disbelief. "What?" "And look at these messages." Maggie scrolled through dozens of emails. People wanting to visit Duke, schools wanting to bring children to meet him, a children's book author asking permission to write Duke's story. Dr. Chen, who had stayed late to monitor Lucky, shook her head in wonder. "In 20 years of veterinary medicine, I've never seen anything like this. Duke didn't just save a kitten. He reminded people that compassion still exists, even in the hardest circumstances." That night, after the reporters had left and the crowds had dispersed, Cole stood at his bedroom window looking out at the barn. A light glowed in Duke's stall, and through the window he could see the old bull lying in fresh hay, content and peaceful. In the kitchen below, Lucky slept in its warm box, recovering more each hour. And somewhere out in the world, millions of people were sharing a story about an old bull who proved that heroism doesn't need words, fame, or recognition. It just needs a compassionate heart willing to sacrifice everything for someone who needs help. 3 weeks later, the media frenzy had finally calmed. The reporters had moved on to other stories, the news vans had disappeared from the driveway, and life on the Bennett farm had returned to something resembling normal. But everything had changed. Lucky, the tiny white kitten that had been hours from death, now scurried across the farmhouse floors with boundless energy. The pneumonia had cleared completely, and Dr. Chen had declared the kitten fully recovered. Its white fur had grown thick and soft, and its blue eyes sparkled with mischief and curiosity. "That cat is into everything," Maggie laughed one morning, rescuing her knitting from Lucky's playful claws. "Curtains, furniture, my yarn, nothing safe." But every afternoon at 3 o'clock, something remarkable happened. Lucky would stop whatever chaos it was creating, trot to the back door, and meow insistently until someone let it out. Then the small white kitten would make its way across the yard, through the fence, and into the south pasture. Straight to Duke. Cole watched from the porch as Lucky approached the massive Hereford bull who was resting in the shade of an old oak tree. Duke lifted his enormous head, saw the kitten, and a visible calm settled over him. Lucky walked right up to the bull's front legs and curled up against his side, purring loudly enough to be heard from 15 feet away. Duke lowered his head protectively over the kitten, creating a shelter with his own body. "Every single day," Cole said softly as Maggie joined him. 3 o'clock, like clockwork. Lucky goes to find Duke. "And Duke waits for it," Maggie added, wiping her eyes. "Look at him. He's completely relaxed when that kitten's there." Dr. Chen had explained it during her final checkup visit. Duke imprinted on Lucky during those 3 days. In his mind, that kitten is his to protect, and Lucky recognizes Duke as the one who saved it. They've formed a bond that transcends species. The GoFundMe had raised over $30,000, more than enough to cover all veterinary costs, with plenty left over. Cole and Maggie had used the extra money to repair the barn roof, fix fences, and finally address years of deferred maintenance on the farm. But the real gift had been something money couldn't buy. A local elementary school had asked permission to bring students to meet Duke and hear his story. Cole had agreed hesitantly, worried about overwhelming the old bull. But Duke had been gentle and patient with the children, allowing them to pet him, standing perfectly still as they gathered around. "Why did he save the kitten?" a little girl had asked, her hand on Duke's side. Cole had thought about that question for a long time before answering, because that's who Duke is. He saw something helpless that needed help, and he gave everything he had to protect it. That's what real heroes do. Now, weeks later, Duke had become something of a local legend. Visitors still came occasionally, always respectful, always moved by the sight of the massive bull and tiny white kitten resting together in the afternoon sun. One evening, as the Oklahoma sky turned gold and purple, Cole walked out to the pasture. Duke and Lucky were in their usual spot, the kitten curled against the bull's side, both of them peaceful. "You know, boy," Cole said quietly, sitting on the fence rail, "you taught a lot of people something important these past few weeks. Taught me something too." Duke's ear twitched, listening. "You could have drunk that water any time. You were dying. But you chose to stand guard instead. You chose someone else's life over your own comfort." Cole's voice grew thick. "That's the kind of courage most people never find." Lucky stretched, yawned, and resettled against Duke's warm side. The bull shifted slightly, ensuring the kitten remained comfortable and protected. As darkness fell over the farm, Cole returned to the house where Maggie waited on the porch. Together they watched the unlikely pair in the pasture, a 14-year-old bull and a 3-month-old kitten, connected by a bond that had begun in desperation and grown into something beautiful. The next morning, Duke was waiting by the barn when Cole came out for feeding. The old bull walked over and gently bumped his head against Cole's chest, his way of saying good morning, the same greeting he'd given for 14 years. But there was something different in his eyes now, something peaceful, content. He'd saved a life. He'd done what mattered most. And in doing so, he'd reminded the world that compassion isn't about size, strength, or recognition. It's about seeing someone who needs help and refusing to look away, no matter the cost. Lucky appeared at the barn door, meowing loudly. Duke turned his massive head toward the sound, and if a bull could smile, Cole swore Duke was smiling. "Go on," Cole said, laughing. "Your friend's calling." Duke walked toward the kitten, and Lucky immediately wound between the bull's legs, purring. Together, they headed toward the pasture for another day of their unlikely friendship. And Cole knew, watching them go, that some stories don't need endings. They just need to be witnessed, remembered, and shared. So that somewhere, someone facing their own impossible choice might remember an old bull who chose compassion over survival, and find the courage to do the same. Sick old bull refuses to drink water, then vet realizes what's floating in the trough,